Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. I hadn't meant to see the message. If Marie had kept her phone on silent, maybe it would have stayed hidden, and I'd be trudging along, blissfully ignorant of the tangled mess she was weaving around us. But life has a funny way of laying secrets bare at the most unexpected times. It was a lazy Saturday morning, and Marie had gone out early to run errands. She left her phone on the counter, a first, really, as she usually kept it close to her like a second skin. And that was when it buzzed, lighting up with a notification that shattered the quiet of my morning coffee. I don't know why I looked. Maybe it was a reflex or simple curiosity. But there it was, clear as day, a message from someone labeled Trish, work, yet clearly hinting at something else. The preview read, "Last night was unforgettable. Can't wait to see you again." The words spun in my mind, twisting my stomach and making my skin flush with a mixture of disbelief and dread. My world, once rock solid, shifted under me, and I stood there, mug in hand, trying to grasp what this meant. I tried to convince myself there was some innocent explanation, but denial only lasted a few seconds. Suddenly, all those tiny red flags I'd ignored flared up in my mind. Marie's unexpected late nights at work, her sudden attention to her appearance, the new perfume she'd started wearing. Each little thing, shrugged off as trivial, now linked into a chain, one that was wrapped around her clandestine life, and one I wasn't a part of. The house felt too quiet, and the coffee too bitter. I set my mug down and leaned on the counter, trying to breathe deeply, to calm myself, but the shock had settled, turning into a cold fury that pressed against my temples. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. The logical side of me needed more proof, needed to see that this was real before blowing up years of marriage over a single message. So, I did what I had to do, I waited. When Marie came home that morning, I didn't confront her. Instead, I smiled, making small talk while watching her every move. I hadn't noticed before, but there was a lightness in her step, a sort of glow, as if she had a secret making her feel alive. And maybe she did. I forced myself to keep my face neutral, to pretend I was none the wiser. "Busy morning?" I asked as she breezed into the kitchen, unloading a bag of groceries onto the counter. "Just the usual," she replied, smiling. "Had to pick up a few things. You know how it is." She glanced at me, her face soft and open, though I noticed she avoided eye contact for just a moment too long. I kept up the facade, asking about her plans for the day, listening to her talk about mundane things while every part of me itched to demand the truth. But I had a plan forming in my mind, one that required patience and, I hoped, a cooler head. Over the next week, I became the attentive husband, giving her no reason to suspect I knew anything. In fact, I made sure to be even more caring, asking about her day and acting like nothing was wrong, while behind the scenes, I was turning detective. Every chance I got, I checked her phone, finding more texts and confirmations of nights out with Trish, messages I never would have thought to question. I sifted through her call logs, even making copies of them, a grim ritual I had never imagined myself doing. My gut twisted with each new confirmation. But it was better than guessing. It was better than lying awake at night, wondering what she was up to when she claimed to be working late. In those quiet moments alone, I thought back on the early days of our relationship, memories flooding me with warmth only to be dashed by the growing pile of evidence. I'd loved Marie since we were both in college, sharing dreams of the life we'd build together. We'd supported each other through the hard years, through promotions and career shifts. I couldn't pinpoint when things had started slipping, when she had started drifting, but somehow, she'd fallen out of our shared orbit and into someone else's. And yet, she hadn't told me, hadn't given me the courtesy of an explanation. Instead, she'd spun this web, keeping me in the dark while she ventured off into another life. A week later, I had all the proof I needed. My folder of call logs, messages, and photos lay stashed in a drawer, a silent testament to the double life my wife was leading. It was hard to believe the woman I thought I knew so well could be capable of such deception. But there it was, as undeniable as the cold metal drawer that held it. I waited until Saturday night to put my plan into motion. I knew she'd be seeing him. She'd told me she'd be working late again, another of her thinly veiled excuses that I could now see right through. As she got ready, I watched her from the bedroom doorway, taking in the way she put on her makeup carefully, checking her reflection with an excited sparkle in her eye. I hadn't seen that look in a long time, hadn't even realized I missed it until I knew it wasn't for me. "Big night?" I asked, feigning innocence. "Oh, just a company dinner," she said, barely glancing at me as she applied her lipstick. "You know how it is, dull and exhausting." Her smile didn't reach her eyes, and I nodded, trying not to let my own expression betray me. "Well, I hope it's not too dull," I replied. She gave me a half-hearted smile and went back to her reflection. It took every ounce of self-control to keep my voice steady, to maintain the mask I wore over my simmering anger. Soon, I reminded myself, I'd be the one with control. Soon, she'd see that I wasn't as clueless as she thought. Once she left, I sat down at the table, letting my mask slip away. My hand trembled slightly as I picked up the folder, running a finger over its edge. It felt surreal, almost like a bad dream, yet I knew that when she returned, there would be no pretending, no avoidance. This double life she'd created would come crashing down, and I'd be the one to light the match. I didn't sleep much that night. Marie returned home around midnight, the house settling into silence as she climbed into bed, oblivious to the storm she'd invited into our lives. I lay there, pretending to sleep, while my mind raced, wrestling with emotions I hadn't let myself feel yet, anger, betrayal, and a strange sense of relief. In the morning, I'd have my answer. In the morning, the truth would spill out, and there'd be no going back. Sunday dawned cool and quiet, with sunlight seeping through the blinds, casting thin stripes across the room. Marie was still asleep, her face peaceful, relaxed, as if she hadn't a single regret. It almost broke me, seeing her there like that, as though she were the same woman I'd married years ago. But she wasn't, and that thought steeled me. I slid out of bed, took the folder from the drawer, and placed it on the kitchen table, knowing she'd find it soon enough. I poured myself a cup of coffee and waited. The minutes ticked by as I replayed the past few days in my mind, anticipating how she might react. Would she deny it? Try to gaslight me? Maybe even throw her affair in my face? Whatever happened, I was ready. This was a line she couldn't talk her way out of. Marie finally wandered into the kitchen, her eyes still heavy with sleep, dressed in the old sweatshirt and shorts she always wore on lazy Sundays. She paused when she saw me sitting there, something unreadable flickering across her face. "Morning," she said, her voice light, innocent. She walked to the coffee maker, reaching for a mug as if everything were normal. I watched her, waiting. She must have felt my eyes on her because she turned back to me, her brow furrowing slightly. "You okay?" she asked, pouring her coffee, her voice soft with concern. She was good at pretending, almost convincing enough to make me doubt myself. Almost. Instead of answering, I pushed the folder toward her. Her eyes followed the movement, and she frowned, glancing between the folder and me. "What's this?" she asked, her voice wary now, guarded. "Open it," I said, my voice hard, unfamiliar even to myself. Marie hesitated, her fingers hovering above the folder, as though touching it might burn her. Finally, she lifted the cover and began to flip through the pages. Her face drained of color as she took in each piece of evidence, screenshots of messages, call logs, even a few photos. The veneer of innocence cracked, and I watched as her expression shifted from shock to realization, and then to something like fear. Where did you? How did you?" she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not stupid, Marie," I said, my voice cold. "I've known for a while now. I just needed proof." She looked up, eyes wide and pleading, searching my face for a shred of understanding. But I had none to give. "It's not what you think," she began, reaching out, but I pulled back, refusing to let her touch me. "Don't lie to me," I said, my words biting, sharper than I'd intended. "I've seen the messages, the calls, the late nights. Do you think I didn't notice?" Her hand dropped to her side, and she stared down at the folder, silent, defeated. The kitchen was painfully quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Seconds stretched into an eternity as we stood there, two strangers bound by broken promises. "I'm sorry," she whispered finally, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't." I cut her off, anger flaring. "Didn't mean for what, Marie? Didn't mean to lie to my face? To make me believe we were okay while you ran off to be with him?" I shook my head, disgusted. "Don't tell me it was an accident." Tears filled her eyes, and for a moment, I thought she might actually feel some shred of remorse. But it was too little, too late. The damage was done, and no amount of tears would change that. "It just happened," she said, her voice breaking. "I was feeling lonely. You've been so busy with work, and I didn't know how to tell you." "So, you told someone else instead?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Is that it? I didn't give you enough attention, so you found someone who would?" She flinched, wiping at her eyes, struggling to hold herself together. "It's not like that," she whispered, her words barely audible. I thought maybe it would make me feel better. I thought maybe it would bring back some spark that's been missing." A bitter laugh escaped me. "A spark, Marie? You thought betraying me would bring back a spark?" I leaned forward, my fists clenched, feeling every bit of rage bubbling up, demanding release. "Do you have any idea what you've done to us? To me?" She looked away, unable to meet my gaze, and I felt the anger drain from me, leaving only a hollow ache where love had once been. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, forcing my voice to remain calm. "You've made your choice, Marie," I said quietly. "And now, I'm making mine." Her eyes snapped back to me, panic flooding her face. "What do you mean?" I held her gaze, unflinching. "I'm done. With this, with you, with all of it." I stood, pushing my chair back, and walked past her, feeling a strange sense of finality settle over me. "I'll be filing for divorce tomorrow." "No, wait," she cried, grabbing my arm, desperate now. "Please, don't do this. We can work through this. We can go to counseling, try to fix things." I looked down at her hand on my arm, feeling nothing but a dull sense of detachment. "There's nothing left to fix, Marie," I said, pulling my arm free. "You killed that the moment you decided I wasn't enough." "But I still love you," she whispered, her voice breaking, and for a moment, I almost believed her. But love didn't look like this. It didn't look like betrayal and deception and lies woven over years. Love was something I had once held dear, something I thought she had cherished, too. But that love was gone, replaced by a twisted version that no longer felt real. "No, Marie," I said softly, shaking my head. "You loved the idea of me. But if you really loved me, you wouldn't have done this." She stared at me, her eyes pleading, but I had nothing left to give. The betrayal had hollowed me out, leaving behind a shell of the man I'd been, a man who now had to pick up the pieces of his life and start anew. Without another word, I turned and left the room, leaving her standing there, a broken woman in the ruins of our marriage. As I stepped outside into the cool morning air, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me, a calmness that hadn't been there in days. I had faced the truth, confronted the lies, and now, finally, I was free. The next few days were a blur, filled with paperwork, phone calls, and quiet moments that lingered between disbelief and acceptance. The reality of the divorce hit hard, even as I reminded myself it was the right choice. Marie's betrayal ran deep, yet somehow, I couldn't shake the memories of our life before this. But every time I felt a pang of sadness, I'd remember the messages, the lies, and the hidden life she'd kept from me. Once I'd filed the paperwork, I moved out temporarily, staying at a friend's apartment across town. I needed space, somewhere far enough from her and from the remnants of our life together to start finding my own way again. It wasn't easy, but there was a strange sense of freedom in it, a sliver of hope buried beneath the grief. Marie tried reaching out, sending messages, leaving voicemails, pleading to meet and talk. Each time, I ignored her. I had said everything I needed to say that Sunday morning, and nothing would change the fact that I was done. I knew she was struggling, that she was facing the fallout of her choices, but I couldn't let that sway me. She'd made her decision long before I knew the truth, and now I had made mine. One evening, after a particularly long day, I found myself back at our house. I'd come to pick up a few remaining things, some clothes, a few books, odds and ends I hadn't packed when I left. The house was silent, and the emptiness struck me in a way I hadn't expected. It felt hollow, as though the warmth and love that had once filled the walls had seeped out, leaving only the cold remnants of what we'd built. As I walked through the rooms, I paused in the living room, taking in the familiar details, the photos on the wall, the blanket Marie and I had bought on our first trip together, the little mementos of a life that now felt like someone else's. I reached out, brushing my fingers over a photo of us from a few years back. We were smiling, carefree, as though nothing could touch us. But it had. And now, that memory felt as distant as a dream. Just as I was about to leave, I heard the door open. I turned to see Marie standing there, her face pale, eyes red from tears. She looked at me, a faint hope flickering across her expression, but I steeled myself, refusing to let her break the barrier I had built. "I didn't know you'd be here," she said quietly, her voice shaky. "Just picking up a few things," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I didn't want to talk, didn't want to engage in the painful back and forth we'd already gone through. "Please, can we just talk?" she asked, taking a tentative step forward. "Just one last time." I looked at her, feeling the familiar twist of emotions, anger, betrayal, the faint echo of love. Against my better judgment, I nodded, motioning for her to sit. We settled across from each other in the living room, the silence thick between us. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I've hurt you in ways I can't even understand. But I just want you to know I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I studied her face, seeing the genuine regret etched into her expression. For a moment, I felt the weight of her sorrow, the pain she was carrying. But then, the memories of her lies came rushing back, and I reminded myself that her apology couldn't undo the damage. "You were my best friend, Marie," I said, my voice steady. "You were my everything. And you threw that away for what? A thrill? A secret life?" She looked down, her hands trembling as she twisted her fingers together. "I don't know," she whispered. "I wish I had an answer, but I don't. I was lost. I was looking for something I couldn't even name." "Then why didn't you tell me?" I asked, the question cutting through the silence. "Why didn't you talk to me, instead of running to him?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I was scared, I guess. Scared that you wouldn't understand, that you'd think I was broken or ungrateful. I didn't want to lose you, but somehow I still managed to." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "You didn't just lose me, Marie. You destroyed us." Her face crumpled, and for a brief moment, I felt a pang of pity. But I reminded myself that I was here for closure, not for reconciliation. This was a moment to let go, to put the final nail in the coffin of our life together. "I loved you," I said, my voice breaking despite my resolve. I thought you were my forever. But I can't be with someone who thinks so little of that love, someone who thinks it's okay to lie, to cheat, to betray everything we built. Marie nodded, her gaze fixed on her hands. I know, she whispered. I know I ruined everything, and I know I have no right to ask for anything. But I just wanted you to know that I regret it. I regret all of it. Silence settled between us, heavy and final. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over me. The anger, the hurt, the resentment, all of it seemed to fade, leaving only a quiet acceptance. Marie's regret was real, her sorrow genuine, but it was too late. I was ready to let go, to move forward and rebuild. I hope you find whatever you were looking for, I said, standing. But it's not with me. She looked up, her face crumpling as the weight of my words sank in. Please, can't we try again? I shook my head, a sad smile tugging at my lips. It's over, Marie. I've already filed the papers. You'll get them soon. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I understand. I just wish I could undo it all. I turned, my heart heavy but resolute, and walked out of the house, leaving Marie behind in the echoes of what once was. Leaving the house felt like crossing an invisible threshold. My chest was tight, my heart heavy, but with every step I took, the weight seemed to lift, little by little. I wanted to believe that the worst was behind me. That maybe this was just the start of something better. A clean break. But healing isn't so neat. Days bled into weeks, and I buried myself in work. I threw myself into late nights, extra projects, anything to avoid thinking about Marie or the life I was dismantling, one signature at a time. Friends checked in, offering invitations and assurances that I'd be back on my feet soon. I tried to believe them, nodding along, forcing smiles, but there were too many moments when the silence would close in around me. Late at night, lying in a bed that felt too big, I'd stare at the empty space beside me, wondering how it had all fallen apart. One evening, as I walked into my empty apartment, the red message light on my answering machine blinked. I hadn't given that machine a second thought in months, so I hit play out of habit, expecting maybe a telemarketer or a wrong number. But as the message began, Marie's voice echoed through the room, fragile and broken. Hey, she said, her voice soft and trembling. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I don't know who else to talk to. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I keep thinking about everything I threw away. I just wanted you to know that. I understand now. I get why you left, and I'm sorry. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know. Her voice cracked, and the message ended in a quiet beep. I stared at the machine, the words replaying in my mind. There was something haunting in her tone, a depth of sadness that unsettled me. I tried to brush it off, chalking it up to guilt or regret, and poured myself a drink, hoping the alcohol might dull the ache that her voice had stirred. The next morning, I was jolted awake by my phone ringing, far too early for any casual call. The number was unfamiliar, and a strange sense of dread prickled at the back of my mind as I answered. Hello? Is this James Mitchell? A voice asked, somber and professional. Yes, this is he, I replied, my pulse quickening. There was a pause, and then the voice continued. Mr. Mitchell, I'm Officer Grant with the county police. I'm sorry to inform you that we responded to an emergency call at your former residence last night. It appears your ex-wife, Marie, passed away. I froze, the words sinking in, hollow and surreal. What happened? I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. The officer hesitated. It looks like an overdose. We're still investigating, but it appears to have been self-inflicted. We found a note addressed to you. A chill ran down my spine. The weight I'd thought I'd shed came crashing back, pressing down on me with a force I hadn't known I could feel. The officer explained that I could collect her belongings when I was ready, including the note, and offered his condolences before hanging up. I stood there, gripping the phone, feeling like I'd stepped into a nightmare I couldn't wake from. The next day, I went to the precinct. They handed me Marie's final note, a folded piece of paper, smudged in places as though she'd been crying when she wrote it. I held it, feeling its weight in my hand, unsure if I could bear to read it but knowing I had to. When I finally unfolded it, her handwriting met me, shaky and uneven. James. If you're reading this, I guess I wasn't strong enough. I tried to make sense of it all, tried to forgive myself, but I couldn't. Losing you was the hardest thing I've ever endured, and I know it's my fault, all of it. I don't expect you to understand, and I don't blame you for not forgiving me. But please, just know that I loved you. Maybe I didn't show it the way I should have, and maybe I was selfish, but there was never a day I didn't love you. I wish I could take it all back. I wish I could fix it. But I know that's impossible now. I hope you find peace, James. You deserve it. I hope one day you'll remember me as something more than just the woman who broke your heart. I'm sorry I couldn't be better for you. I'm sorry for everything. Love, always. Marie. I read her words, over and over, each line chipping away at the anger I'd held so tightly. She was gone, and all that was left were her words, a confession of love twisted by regret and grief. I folded the note, feeling an emptiness that no amount of closure could fill. As I left the precinct, I walked through a city that felt both familiar and alien. I passed couples, families, people wrapped in lives filled with small moments of joy, and I felt like a ghost, detached from everything around me. I'd spent so long focusing on my own hurt that I hadn't stopped to think about the weight Marie had been carrying. Maybe I'd been right to leave, to protect myself. But maybe, in doing so, I'd left her with a wound too deep to heal. In the end, there was no solace, no catharsis. Only a hollow sense of loss, and the knowledge that some wounds never truly fade. Life went on, the days slipping by, but every now and then, when the world quieted around me, I'd hear her voice, that final voicemail echoing in my mind, a reminder of the love we'd lost, and the price we'd both paid for it.